Welcome, everyone. I think we're going to get started just because we have a short hour today to digest a ton of great information from our guest speaker. My name is Evie Bauman. I'm the city's Director of Sustainability. We are thrilled to have you here today to join us for the final installment of our Comprehensive Plan Speaker Series. So far, we've heard from experts in housing and transportation and economic development. And today we're thrilled to welcome Chris Castro from the U.S. Department of Energy to join us to share more about sustainability. Specifically, he'll talk more about how South Bend can take advantage of the historical federal funding we're seeing for clean energy, energy efficiency, workforce development, and overall carbon pollution reduction. These are critical components of the vision for South Bend over the next 20 years. And Chris will help us understand how South Bend as a community can take advantage of these unprecedented funds. So we're aiming, I'm going to briefly introduce Chris right after this, then pass it to him for his presentation. And we're aiming for about a 10 to 15 minute window at the end of our hour today for Q&A. So again, please put your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So without further ado, I'll introduce Chris. He is the Chief of Staff for the Office of State and Community Energy Programs at the U.S. Department of Energy. He previously served as the Senior Advisor to Mayor Buddy Dyer and Director of Sustainability and Resilience at the City of Orlando, Florida. He's well known for his entrepreneurial efforts. Prior to coming to the city, he was the co-founder and president of several companies and organizations, including the global sustainability nonprofit Ideas for Us, a clean energy consulting firm, Citizen Energy, and a renowned urban farming social enterprise, Fleet Farming. He's originally from Miami, Florida, and he holds a BS in Environmental Science and Policy from the University of Central Florida. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining us today.
Well, Evie, thank you and the entire South Bend team for this invitation. I'm excited to shed some light on what we're up to here at the Department of Energy and opportunities that you all, not just the city itself, but other community serving institutions can actually take advantage of this moment. And I think we're at an incredible time, right? We know that over the last 4 or 5 years, cities have really led the charge for climate action. And we're now in a magic moment. And in fact, part of my presentation that I'd like to share today is kind of where we are in that magic moment, the imperative around getting this right and centering energy and climate justice in our work, introducing you all to this new Office of State and Community Energy Programs and what opportunities that we're managing here, as well as a newly forming function around community engagement and some of the tools that we have and even programs that we've released to start meaningfully engaging communities. And then lastly, what other opportunities are there out there for South Bend and DOE to get together and work together along this journey towards 100% clean energy. Before I dive right in, Evie mentioned that I'm coming from the last decade on the ground in Orlando, Florida, and I want to say how important the work that you all are doing is for the future of this country. I had the pleasure and honor of working with our mayor, Buddy Dyer, on an incredible amount of different policies and programs as it relates to buildings, to vehicles and clean transportation, as well as, of course, power generation and renewables. And that's just in the clean energy space. As I'm sure Evie and the sustainability team know, that's one of many pillars of urban sustainability that we're asked to focus on in our communities. In addition to things like local food and livable systems and water resources and zero waste and the like. I'm passionate about all those topics, but certainly clean energy is an area that I've spent the last 15 years diving into and as Evie mentioned, actually starting nonprofits and companies that somehow figure out a way to advance place-based clean energy transitions. And being up here at DOE, I've now assumed this role as the Chief of Staff and in this new Office of State and Community Energy Programs. And my charge here is to take my lessons learned at the local level and really expand them, scale them across the country. And so I'm hoping that those insights can certainly make their way to South Bend and beyond. Starting out, I think it's really important to underscore kind of the importance around the Biden-Harris administration's priorities. This administration knows that there is no greater challenge facing our nation, the health of our communities, of course, the health of our planet, than the climate crisis. And the interesting thing about how President Biden and Vice President Harris approach this challenge is that it's very much an opportunity for us to actually revitalize the U.S. economy, to shore bound our energy and manufacturing sectors and bring back our resilient supply chains. Use this opportunity to create millions of high-wage, good-paying jobs across the country. Of course, clean energy being one of the fastest-growing industries in our economy, and so obviously that's a big focus. And doing so in the right way, addressing historic environmental, energy, and climate injustices and inequalities that are faced across every community in this country because of systemic issues. And so DOE is taking these three opportunities, and we're doing our part to advance a really important aspect of our climate goals, and that is to move us to essentially a 52% reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, to get to 100% clean electric grid by 2035, and to achieve this net zero emissions economy-wide by the year 2050. We know that there are several reports. The IPCC sixth report just came out, right, earlier this week, and it continues to underscore that we're not doing enough, and that if we don't continue taking action at the local levels, that the future of our communities are going to be unnoticeable and potentially uninhabitable in many parts of the world. And so what we're trying to do here with addressing climate and advancing sustainability is all around the realm of improving public health, our security and our safety of our communities, addressing obviously these huge threats that are coming from natural disasters and making us more resilient to those. But it's also about economic development. It's about an opportunity for us to pivot our local economies and diversify them to ensure that clean energy is a huge part of that, as a huge part of how people make a living, a living wage in your community, and can raise families and build wealth and so on and so forth, right? So we're in this magic moment, and I've been kind of in this movement over the last 15 years, working diligently every day. There are people who have been doing this work for decades on end, and we've been screaming since we identified this climate crisis and brought it forward to the United Nations in 1988 by NASA engineer James Hansen, right? Since that date, we've been trying to figure out a comprehensive strategy and investment into addressing this issue. And it took up until 2021, quite frankly. And you see that these three bills here, Secretary Granholm often talks about this magic moment in a creative way. She talks about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or what's known as the IIJA, as the backbone for the clean energy economy. Of course, this is building clean tech infrastructure and supply chains. It's helping us to increase our climate resilience with these investments, and of course, invest in our workers, focusing on labor and focusing on trying to improve wealth. That's the backbone. Then we had the CHIPS and Science Act, and she calls this the brain of the clean energy economy, because what the CHIPS Act does is it starts to drive clean tech innovations across our national labs, across our higher ed institutions, and make significant investments in our manufacturing and our supply chains here, specifically with things like semiconductors and chips, which are a requirement in pretty much every clean technology that we're trying to deploy. From heat pumps to electric vehicles to solar panels and everything in between, right? Inverters, you name it, they're all needing chips. So being able to be more dependent on ourselves, and that's why chips is so important. And then, of course, Inflation Reduction Act, she calls it the lungs of the clean energy economy, and it's breathing new life into this movement, and it will for the next decade to 2 to 3 decades ahead because of the impact. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act is focusing on investing in our actual households, lowering household utility bills through these rebates and tax credits, which I'll talk about, pulling clean tech into the market at a scalable rate where it becomes a significant part of our economy, and using this moment to address environmental justice and the inequalities that are faced. And you'll see that many of the tax credits and the rebates are targeting our lowest income households so that they benefit the most from these investments. So all that said is we're at this magic moment, and all of a sudden DOE, because of these three bills, gets over $100 billion on top of our base fund that runs the Department of Energy in our regular program. So $100 billion on top of the base annual appropriation has come to DOE. And what Secretary Granholm said very quickly is, we are not organized to effectively meet that mission. And this mission of this $100 billion is the equitable deployment of clean energy. It's deployment mission. And for the last 45 plus years, DOE has been a research and development agency, right? Building up 17 national labs and all the core competencies of researching these clean technologies. But now we have this mission of get it deployed and get it across our communities and do it in an equitable way. And so very quickly, the secretary created a new pillar. You see this in gold, the Undersecretary for Infrastructure. That was never around DOE before last year. And the idea was that we needed a whole pillar, a whole focus of the DOE that targeted this mission of equitable deployment, and then nestled a bunch of the program offices that had deployment resources and technical assistance opportunities, nestled them under this new pillar, what we call S3. And so you can see that in addition to the blue, which I'll get to, we have a grid deployment office now that's focused on expanding our electric grid and making it more resilient, right? We have the manufacturing and energy supply chains office that's solely focused on investing in battery recycling and battery manufacturing and supply chains for batteries and solar and a bunch of other things, right? And so onshoring those capabilities back to the US. We have an office called the Clean Energy Demonstrations. They're the ones that have the big hydrogen hubs, FOA, and direct air capture and big battery grants. The idea is that we're trying to actually take lab scale demonstrations and get them to an economy scale, right? And the Loan Programs Office, a lot of people don't realize that DOE actually has a finance arm called LPO. It's ran by the very famous Jigar Shah, who's our director of this office. And LPO has hundreds of billions of dollars of loan authority, lending capabilities to cities, to utilities, to private businesses, to take low-cost capital and scale up clean energy deployment. Of course, we're here to talk about SCEP, which is one of the newly formed offices as well in S3. And again, I'm doing the great work in Orlando, not even considering opportunities here in DOE. And I got a call and an opportunity to come and help build this new office. And SCEP is really intended to be the front door, the tip of the spear, so to speak, of how we engage with our state governments, our tribal governments, of course, our local governments and other community serving institutions. We want to be this bridge, and not just a one-time bridge, but building a resilient bridge to our communities so that we have this ongoing relationship, this feedback for us to go together along this journey. And so we manage all of the main community-facing funding and technical assistance programs, not all of them, but most of them. And we serve as this kind of connective tissues between various other offices. Like I said, I've been promoting MESC and GDO and Loan Programs Office. That's because most of the initiatives all fall to a place one way or another. And so most of these communities are coming through SCEP, but they're asking about other resources. And we've now become kind of this hub and spoke model, which I'll talk about our community engagement function here soon. All that said is, one of the challenges with SCEP is that we were formed by bringing several different grant programs that were existing across DOE and bring them together under one office. And the challenge behind that is that these different programs have different statutory restrictions. They have different, ways and processes in which they've done things in the past. And our opportunity here is ensuring that the whole of SCEP is greater than the sum of its individual parts, that being in individual grants. We want to really provide this holistic approach to the clean energy journey and extend the capabilities and the capacities of South Bend and other cities like South Bend to actually implement these projects well into the future. This is going to be, years and decades of our transition and years and decades of opportunities for economic development and investment, to create jobs, to help lower cost on our households, of course, to deploy clean energy. So all that said is we manage a good portion of DOE's $100 billion, of $16 billion just in SCEP. And those are different formula grants, they're competitive grants, there are even some technical assistance programs, which I'll mention here as we move forward. I wanted to now, really underscore the importance around where we are with climate and environmental justice and the importance and why we've centered it as the lens that we're looking through as we're designing these programs and as we're rolling out these funds. First and foremost, I think all of us are aware about many of the environmental injustices today, and I wanted to run through 4 of the really key data points that really influence our approach. One is that too often we talk about climate pollution, carbon emissions, but we don't often talk about air pollution exposure from the same sources that give off the carbon emissions. And that exposure to things like particulate matter 2.5 or PM10 or carbon monoxide or SOx and NOx, right? All of these other pollutants are detrimental, not just to the planetary health, but more so to human health. And that's where, we have an opportunity to really think about how do we approach clean energy from a different narrative, right? This is really just showing us that the exposure of a lot of these pollutants are disproportionately impacting communities of color, communities that, and they're impacting the communities that don't create those emissions, right? And so whether you're Black, whether you're Hispanic, you're seeing that there's a disproportionate impact from the emissions that were caused by those demographics to those that are exposed. Secondly, we know that climate change impacts are disproportionate as well. When we look at these 4 social vulnerable groups, whether low-income population, whether it's minority population, populations with no high school diploma, or those that are elderly, you start to see that those social vulnerable groups happen to be the most impacted by climate change, both on the front end. Usually they're living in substandard housing, they have higher energy burdens than their neighbors, then they get hit by the climate impact, and they're usually the hardest hit. They don't have the ability of having a backup generator or something to kind of recover very quickly in the moment. And then of course the recovery usually takes the longest and often don't recover back to their par, right? And so we know that there are climate injustices that need to be addressed today. Clean energy access, and not just to the technologies, but more so to the financing to get those technologies, has also been disproportionately impacting our communities of color. And so we know when you look at just kind of rooftop solar compared to minority communities compared to non-minority communities, you start to see the real discrepancy in the access to these technologies, and it starts to roll back into the access of the financing and the jobs and the opportunities, right? And certainly a big focus of ours in SCEP is energy burden, and that being the percentage of your household income that goes towards energy. That's known as the energy burden. And of course, the national average, is right around 3%. And you're starting to see that many of our social vulnerable groups that we've talked about earlier are disproportionately spending 2, sometimes 3 times as much in terms of their energy bills per square foot than a more affluent home. And they may be just a different census tract right across the street, right? And so we know that there's this challenge. Of course, there's a lot of renters in these social vulnerable groups. They primarily are higher renter populations, and you have this split incentive between the landlord and the renter, and who's going to make the investment X, Y, and Z, right? These are the types of challenges we need to get to. So all that said is the president, and you might be aware that within this first couple days, or I think his first day or two of taking office, signed the executive order 14008 that ultimately is around climate justice. And you might have heard of Justice 40, but this is our approach for the first time ever that the federal government has made it a goal that 40% of the overall benefits, not necessarily 40% of the funding, but even more so probably, but 40% of the benefits of these investments to flow to our disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, that are underserved, that are overburdened by a lot of the legacy pollution we've been talking about from the historic energy systems that we're now trying to pivot from. I put there is a link that I'm happy to share, and there's a tool, sorry, called the Climate and Economic Screening tool that was created by the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and it's an amazing tool because it helps us to demystify where do investments to Justice 40 actually meet the definition in my city. This is actually a snapshot of South Bend I did earlier today on the tool. And the cool thing is it breaks it down to your various census tract parcels. And when you click one of the census tracts on the right-hand side, you see a toolbar of different actual factors that go towards defining a community as disadvantaged or not. And when you click, let's say, the health that's there in dark blue, it'll break down the exact metric as to why that neighborhood in South Bend was considered disadvantaged for whatever it might be. So this is really an important tool as you all are thinking about where our resources should be going. Where can South Bend be most competitive as we apply for a bunch of these competitive grants? Well, keep in mind that we are trying to target our disadvantaged communities. We're trying to make sure that the benefits flow to those communities. And so if you're, and so this map can help you identify where those hot spots are, depending on the particular grant terms and what they're trying to get out of it from an outcomes perspective. So that's important. Check out the CGIS tool. It's great, and it gives you a lot of insight and data. Okay, so now I'm pivoting over to the formation of kind of what SCEP looks like from an org charts perspective. And this is a bit messy, but I'm going to do some stage setting here. So first and foremost is a legend at the top left. Everything that's in blue is IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Everything that's in red is the Inflation Reduction Act. Everything that's in purple are annual appropriations, or what we call base funding, right? There are over 28 different funding and technical assistance programs that you see on this org chart here. Every bullet is a different grant program that we are managing. And as you can see, we're broken down into these primarily 4 big divisions. The first division really is around weatherization assistance, and I'll get into that program in a little bit of detail. The second one is what's called the State Energy Program. That flows to all 50 states and the territories in DC. Then we have community energy programs, which is really where Congress has now enabled new pathways to get into cities and communities like South Bend and unlock opportunities for them. And then you have this whole partnerships pillar here, which is where a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act rebates and other grants have fallen into. And so I'll go through each one of these at a pretty high level, but give you some insight about each one of them. All together, $16 billion worth of the formula and competitive grants. That's IRA and bill money. And then on top of that, you have about $700 million in the base funding that goes towards other weatherization programs, annual SCP programs, and even 2 new local government grants that are in design that if I don't get to, you should ask me about. So the first one here, weatherization readiness and retrofit. So this is DOE's and the nation's oldest whole house energy efficiency program. It targets the lowest income in our community and helps provide them 100% subsidy up to about $8,500 or so to make improvements to their home to lower the energy burden and make their home more affordable. We, on an annual basis, this program gets about $300 million in base funding, like I said, and that helps weatherize about 35,000 homes. These are things like duct sealing, air sealing, right, caulking windows and doors, programmable thermostats, high-level weatherization stuff. But at the end of the day, critical, if we're going to start to retrofit HVAC and heat pumps, we need to make sure that we're not just cooling or heating the world and the atmosphere and the environment. We need to make sure that it's cooling your home and it's fully weatherized. So these resources are tremendous. Anybody who's under 80% area median income can sign up for this program and actually first come, first serve, actually get a benefit. And this is tremendous. The bill then plussed up an additional $3.2 billion for weatherization. We anticipate another 500,000 homes on top of the annual 35 to 40,000 homes being weatherized because of this bill. So pretty substantial. If you're not familiar with weatherization assistance, every county government in the United States, every county government in the US has a community action agency that is identified. In order for those funds to flow through that community action agency, and then homeowners throughout the community can actually reach out to that agency and sign up for the weatherization benefits. When I was in Orlando, we didn't manage a bunch of the weatherization, so it wasn't a core part of my strategy. But when I was out at a neighborhood meeting, I was promoting weatherization, especially if it was to communities that are eligible. I was promoting for them to actually go to the county to sign up, right? So cities could be really a distribution channel. We can help recruit and promote and market these opportunities, and that's something that I would kind of recommend for the South Bend sustainability team as well, if you're not already. State energy program. We know there are challenges with how local governments engage at their state level, depending on the state that you're in. I'm coming from Florida, and there were challenges when we were working with our state, but we still found a way to find common ground and to actually work on projects together. One project I just ended before I came up here was it was a climate smart elderly program, it was called, and it aimed to retrofit 100 elderly homes with heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. and it was state dollars that came through the SEP program. And that, flowed through to our city to kind of work on this pilot where the utility and the city and the state all work together to kind of address a really challenging social vulnerable group like elderly, right? Well, state energy program, again, annual dollars, about 66 million annually that flows to all 50 states, 5 territories, and Washington, D.C. So 56 entities get direct money every single year. And the states actually have the control over this money. So that is the one thing, is that the states can use the money for a wide variety of different things. And it's important that local governments are reaching out to the states to express their interest, their needs. So as the states are developing the plans for these funds, you all are on the radar, and there might be an opportunity to use some of those funds to support you all at the local level as well. So the states can sub-grant and re-grant some of these dollars. But all that says, and continue to do everything that you can to build that relationship with the state energy office and try to figure out ways where you can, again, find common ground. Equity and the social vulnerable groups was a common ground between the state and the city, even though we didn't see eye to eye on all politics. So I think that that's important. Next up is really pivoting into more of these community energy programs. And I'm super excited about the EECBG block grant, Energy Efficiency and Conservation block grants. This is a fund that literally goes to over 2,708 individual entities. As you can see that rolling, 1,800 plus cities, 744 tribes, all 50 states, literally hits 250 million Americans across the country. And the beauty about these funds is that they're also very flexible. They are direct formula dollars that will go to the top 10 populated cities and the top 10 populated counties in each state, right? And then in addition, each state also gets dollars. So the good news is South Bend is a city that will be getting direct formula allocations. And again, those dollars could be used towards hiring a consultant to do planning efforts, to actually installing EV charging stations, to installing solar, or, basically it's very open-ended as long as it's helping to cut carbon emissions, improve efficiency, and reduce energy use. As long as it falls into one of those buckets, it'll probably be approved. Now you can see that there's a couple of deadlines. There's actually a pre-application that we're trying to get in by the end of April from all of the eligible entities. It's not a requirement, but it is highly encouraged. And the idea is that it helps to submit your point of contact, who we're going to be engaging with, and help us to start to get some basic information so that we can follow up with you as you're developing your overall plan on how to use these dollars. So EECBG, super exciting. I will also say that if a city or county does not get a direct formula dollar, right? They're not the top 10 in each category. That doesn't mean that they miss out completely, right? There are 2 bites at the apple for smaller rural and remote city and county governments as well. The first bite at the apple is that the states have to, by law, give 60% of their dollars and subgrant them to cities and counties that don't get a direct formula allocation from DOE. So those are your smaller, rural, remote, smaller communities that aren't as populous, right? So they'll be able to go to the state to actually apply for money because the state's required to open those up to competitive grants. In addition to the state dollars, DOE has a carve out of $8.8 million that will also be opened up as a competitive grant to small city and county governments that also don't get a direct formula allocation from us. So if you're a small, rural, remote community, don't worry about not getting a direct formula allocation. You actually have the ability of getting potentially even more money than you would have through a formula allocation. And just keep in mind, state and DOE will both have competitive EECBG grants for you all. Now pivoting a little bit to some other community, I mentioned that there are monies that don't just go to local governments like cities and county governments, but there's also new money that is opened up for community serving institutions. As an example, we have a full grant that's focused on nonprofit 501c3s. This is a $50 million one-time grant. We're hoping that Congress sees the benefit of supporting 501c3s and makes it a base annual program to SCEP. At this point in time, it's part of the IIJA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Grants, according to the statute, again, this was restricted by Congress, but grants can't exceed $200,000 per grant. But the idea is that we want nonprofits, think of your homeless shelters, your, soup kitchens, your childcare facilities, your food banks, your, healthcare facilities. These are really critical institutions that support the overall health of a community. And the idea behind these dollars are to help with retrofitting with certain energy efficiency materials that could ultimately lower the cost of operating that building, the cost of energy and operations, and therefore put more of their dollars to the mission, right? And so we're really looking to prioritize the projects that have the highest energy saving potential. So looking at pre and post, if I did this retrofit, this is how much savings in EUI I would see, or how much dollar savings. We're trying to prioritize the greatest ones. Also, the most cost-effective strategies. Of course, you want to have a good payback. And effective plan for the evaluation and the measurement and the verification of these savings, right? What we call M&V, measurement and verification, is a critical piece of all of this. And so keep in mind that the eligible applicants, as you see there, are really only 501c3s that own and operate their building. So that's important as well. And this is also by statute, but they have to own and operate their building in order for them to be eligible to get this retrofit type grant. There is also grants that go to public school districts. For the first time ever, DOE has now money that goes directly to schools. $500 million for schools over the course of a 4-year period, so about $100 million per year. We just released the first FOA of this back in December, and we have over 1,000 concept papers, over 1,000, about 250. We're highly encouraged to apply to the next round. And really, the idea behind this schools grant is that we're trying to prioritize schools that are trying to fund the highest need, those with the highest free and reduced price lunch percentages, as well as leverage private sector funding through performance contracting. So if a school district can use some of this grant to then leverage with an ESCO, like an energy service company, that can then come in and bring their own capital and do a broad-based performance contract across, instead of one school, maybe it's 10 schools or more. Now we're talking about a very competitive application, because these dollars are going to help to be leveraged and scaled. And that's the idea. $500 million sounds like a huge amount of money, but when you divide it out across the $80 billion of deferred maintenance in public schools alone across America, 80 billion in deferred maintenance in public schools alone, 500 million is a drop in the bucket, right? It's not going to at all solve this problem, but with these dollars, the hope is that we create these scalable models that other school districts that are least resourced might be able to leverage, and to also think about how the private sector comes in and pluses up, leverages our own public dollars to bring in new business models, right? And of course, that creates jobs, and it drives more investment, and it helps scale the impact from one school to maybe dozens. So I will also say there's what's called the Energy Class Prize. You'll see that throughout this presentation, there's a couple of prizes that we have enabled, and prizes are another grant mechanism, but they're not a full FOA or a funding opportunity announcement. They're more lower barrier of entry, and they allow for unconventional beneficiaries or entities, maybe it's community-based organizations, to also participate in this process. So the Energy Class Prize is about helping to build capacity for rural and remote school districts that don't have an energy manager, right? Think about trying to do clean energy projects when you don't even have somebody who's monitoring and measuring your current consumption of energy and thinking about ways to save. Well, there are a lot of school districts that still have not made that investment. And the part of the class prize is that DOE is going to fund energy managers for 2 years in 25 school districts as a model. We have a curriculum that's built that will also train those new energy managers through a cohort so that they can learn about how to perform an ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit, how to do an energy benchmark and compare your buildings, how to prioritize energy conservation measures, right, and the most cost-effective ways to save. These are skill sets that we're trying to then infuse in these school districts so that they have the capacity and the capabilities, back to our mission, to carry on these projects into the future, right? So keep a lookout for that. There is a bunch of workforce development money. I know, obviously, in order to do all this clean energy work, we need to literally hire millions of people. There's an estimate of about 9 million new workers that are going to be needed just to deploy the Inflation Reduction Act funding. 9 million or so. Think about bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science. I mean, we're talking about over a dozen million people that need to get into the clean energy space. So there's a couple of grants we're managing. One is this Energy Auditor Grant Program. It's $40 million. Awards can be up to $2 million. Ultimately, the goal is to fund 20 projects that are, that are trying to train residential and commercial energy auditors. These grants do also flow through the states by statute, and the states are then going to work with higher ed institutions, community colleges, workforce agencies to develop programs that ultimately help to train up these energy auditors. It's going to be a huge job in the future. And when I was in Orlando, I worked with my local community college, Valencia College, to create a new Associates of Science degree. And now we're in the 4th year of the program running, and it's an AS degree called Energy Management and Controls Technologies, EMCT, and it ultimately trains not just energy auditors, but also how do you develop the code for the control systems, because these building automation systems and all these facilities are really sophisticated, and they help to really manage and make these buildings efficient, but a lot of people don't know how to do them, right? How to control those systems. So that's what those trainings are for, and grants like this can help replicate those types of degrees. There's this building training and assessment centers. This is really to help higher ed institutions to develop these new training programs ultimately that really improve buildings. And so this is really trying to fund the actual center at a university over the course of a 4-year period to help with kind of building up this pool of young energy auditing, clean energy kind of leaders, and do those all across the country. And then career skills training. We know that there's a number of people that are kind of maybe in the energy space, but need to improve their skill set to kind of get into certain technologies. You might be installing HVAC, but you don't know how to install a heat pump HVAC, air source heat pump, right? And so there's going to be a number of resources that are going to be available for, again, higher ed institutions to be able to provide these kind of career skills training and boost up on the job training for installing energy efficiency technologies and the like. So workforce development, a lot of opportunity here. And so keep a lookout. All of the grants that I just talked about just now, those last 3, will start to be rolled out over the course of the next few months. So they're in final program design, going through approvals, but you'll see announcements about these here coming soon. So stay tuned and let your universities and colleges know that resources are coming for those. There's been, in fact, we just had a little one-on-one with the mayor right before this webinar, and he actually brought up the Inflation Reduction Act and wanted to make sure that that was something that I articulated on this webinar. But he's absolutely right. The Inflation Reduction Act, the big climate bill that people have been talking about, is a game changer for everything that we're doing. And in SCEP, funny enough, I came here July 18th. I start first day at DOE, and we're a $6 billion office, right? We had the Bipartisan Infrastructure law passed, CHIPS and Science wasn't even passed at that point, and so we're a $6 billion entity. Then 4 weeks later, IRA passes, and they land 10 more billion inside of SCEP. It literally fundamentally alters how we organized ourselves, just like it did for DOE, right? When we got $100 billion. All that said is now there's 10 billion in SCEP that we manage, and these are the 4 provisions that you see here. It's the whole home performance, or what we call the efficiency rebates. We have the whole home electrification rebates. We have the efficiency contractor training grants, and then $1 billion to support states and local governments with adopting updated building codes, specifically trying to stretch those codes to the latest net zero codes or equivalent. So I know that there's a lot of interest in the IRA rebates, and I thought I'd spend a little bit of time to let you know how these rebates are structured and set up. So there's $8.8 billion, you can see there on the left, of the home energy rebates. That includes both the home efficiency and the home electrification rebates, right? Those are 2 different provisions, but they're bundled together. There's also this $200 million contractor training program to help train our existing on-the-ground mom and pop HVAC and plumbing contractors to also be retrained to learn how to install the next generation of these technologies, right? Most people don't realize that a heat pump water heater isn't the same as a resistance heat water heater. It has things like refrigerants inside of it that most plumbers have no idea how to handle. We need to train the plumbing community on how to handle refrigerants the way that HVAC engineers and technicians do, because that's going to be a new challenge that we need to get our hands wrapped around, right? So anyways, $9 billion when you combine the rebates and the training, and then those basically are going to flow as you see there. The home efficiency rebates are going to flow through the states and the territories, and the electrification rebates will flow through the states, territories, and the tribes. The tribes actually get a specific carve out of that $225 million to Indian tribes that are for their rebates for electrification, right? To break this down a little bit easier, this is the first, what we call the homes rebate. This is the residential efficiency rebate, and this is all based on performance, right? The idea is that a home can install a bunch of different technologies. They can do weatherization, they can enhance insulation, they can bring in a new heat pump water heater, and based on their performance, if they see a reduction in 20% of their energy bill, they can actually get a certain amount of money, up to $4,000. If you see a 35% or more savings between the baseline and the performance, then you can get double. You can get up to $8,000 per home in order to do that, right? Those are for those entities that are the lowest income in our community. Again, $8,000 for a low income home to do these whole home efficiency rebates. And these are point of sale rebates, meaning they're not something that you get a coupon and have to mail in and get money back. No. These are off the top when you're going to move forward with the service. So this is really exciting because the idea here is that it can create a new marketplace for these whole home service providers that can approach your home and look at all of the different opportunities to save, bring financing and stack the rebates, and provide a no upfront cost solution for a home that can save between 20 and 35% on their energy bill and get a rebate to help cover a significant component of it, right? So the rebates, again, are going to vary between the energy savings of the household improvements. So between that 20 and 35%, depending on what you invest, is how much money you're going to get. And again, the low income households can access about double of what the other markets. So if you're under 80%, you can get double the amount of those that are over 80% AMI. The next group of rebates is the electrification rebates, and those are the ones that are focused on decarbonizing, electrifying our homes. And basically, rebates are targeting only low and moderate income families, and up to $14,000 total for products like heat pumps and electric stoves and more. So you can see the breakdown of the different appliances and non-appliance upgrades that a home can get that all equal up to $14,000. Like a heat pump, water heater can get $1,750. And you can also upgrade your electric wiring and the overall service in your home, the amperage, right? The bus bar amperage. Sometimes homes are only 100 amps. Well, tacking in a bunch of other loads, you're going to overload your amperage. Well, with these dollars, you can actually increase the service load of your home and allow you to interconnect things like EV charging in the future and heat pumps and other aspects, right? So there are rebates that will literally cut the cost, sometimes eliminate it 100% for certain income qualified individuals. So again, these are all income-based, 80% area median income. You can get up to 100% of the $14,000. And if you're 150% area median income, between 80 and 150, then you can get half of that, right? You can get $7,000 for these improvements. These are real cash, everyone. This is not a tax credit where you do deduction on your taxes. No, this is actual cash that will be put off the top, at the point of sale when you go about improving your home. And so we're really exciting. That also makes them extremely challenging to administer. And I want to be very clear here that DOE's role is to develop the guidance for these rebates and to grant 56 grants. 50 states, 5 territories, and DC will all get an allocation for these rebates. And then each state has to develop how those rebates are going to be administered. Now, of course, what we don't want is 50 different rebate programs across the country. So we're very much coordinating with the states through the National Association of State Energy Officials, NASEO. We're also coordinating through the National Governors Association and others to ensure that the states are participating in the design, the guidance design, so that we don't have these hodgepodge of rebates, but we have more of a ubiquitous standard from state to state. There are some states that run their own rebate programs now, and that are probably not going to change how they do those, right? And that's okay. But the vast majority of states don't run a rebate program today, and they are going to need support from DOE to standardize this. Because again, these rebates are income based. So you got to verify income upon the sale. When you're at the cash register, you got to know whether somebody's 80% AMI or 150% or somewhere. And then secondly, their point of sale. So they have to have a coupon that at the cash register, they click and scan, and all of a sudden, boom, you know, $17.50 of your water heater is now rebated, right? So this is not easy, and that's why these rebates are not yet available, by the way, and they will roll out later this winter. The states are in control of when those roll out, but we're hopeful that the money that we will make available will be this summer in July, and that will give the states enough time for them this Q4 of this year, right, October, November time, to actually have programs for residents in South Bend to be able to access those rebates. Usually there's a lot of questions about whether renters can participate. Yes, they can. Whether multifamily counts. Yes, it does. Pretty much every housing type, every makeup is eligible for these rebates. But of course, we got to make sure that their income verified, right, and that their point of sale. These are the different technologies that are applicable. And of course, we want to align with the Energy Star standard for those appliances that have an Energy Star standard. So your electric heat pump water heaters, you're going to have to install an Energy Star heat pump water heater to get the rebate. Same thing with our clothes dryers, same thing with electric stoves, same thing with other energy saving technologies throughout the house. So we're trying to ensure that we're using the most efficient appliances and equipment that we're installing, right, to get these rebates. So I'm looking at our time here, and I'm seeing that we are about 45 minutes in, and I'm just going to quickly run through the last few slides so that you're aware of some other tools. So in addition to the grant programs that we're managing at DOE, we have a number of technical assistance resources. These are often free opportunities for cities like South Bend to get access to things like peer exchanges, technical data, peer consulting, so kind of a one-on-one, certain questions to navigate certain things. And so in SCEP, we've helped over just the last year over 240 different local governments through different technical assistance stuff. You might have heard of the Better Buildings Challenge. If South Bend isn't a part of it yet, I highly encourage you all to join it, because it does open you up to other opportunities as well, different cohorts and the like. Part of these engagements with these local governments is over time, we learn about the needs of the cities and then incorporate them and develop tools with our national labs. And so we worked with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, to create two really important tools for local government energy and climate planning. The first one here is SLOPE, and really integrates about 50 different data sets and helps understand the energy saving opportunities as well as future energy mix of our community based on different factors. And so it's a really neat tool that is kind of dynamic and you can play with it. The other tool here is LEAD, the LEAD tool, the low income energy affordability data. And this is really an interactive web-based mapping tool that can identify, very similar to the CGIS tool, actually pinpoint energy burden data and other housing characteristic information at the national, state, city, and even census tract level. And we just added a bunch of environmental justice data sets into this as well, into the LEAD tool. So new data sets have just been added, and it's on a refresh on a regular basis. So these two are really important. Again, the LEAD tool can help you identify where in South Bend should I try to roll out low income, maybe campaign for these IRA rebates, because of course they're targeting the 80% AMI and less. So you look at, income data, you start looking at energy burden data, and maybe there's a way for us to work with neighborhood associations or other community-based groups on the ground working in that neighborhood to actually market the rebates to make sure that they're taking advantage, because the rebates are first come, first serve, right? And as the state runs out of those monies, they run out. So we want to make sure that you all are trying to promote these programs. And I think that's a big role that you'll play as South Bend. With that, I'm going to end off today. I had some other slides that I'm going to share to you, but for the sake of time, I think we should open up for Q&A. And just want to thank you all as we close out for the opportunity to share. Hopefully this has been useful. I'm happy to share these slides following this call, and just want to thank you, Evie, and of course the mayor and the entire South Bend team for the invite and for all your work that you're doing to advance this clean energy future. It's amazing.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you everybody for attending. Now we have about 9 minutes left for any questions. And I invite you, we're a small enough group. If you'd like to come off the mic, we haven't received any in the chat so far, so please feel free to pose any questions to Chris at this time. I know it was a lot of information, but we will be posting this at the site that I shared in the chat, so you'll be able to review it again.
This is Gary. I did put a question in the chat. In South Bend, we've got 100,000 population, about 40,000 households. That's a lot of independent decision makers who have to go through the learning curve on how to modify their home. There's a lot of trial and error and slip in that transmission. The other alternative is you count on for-profit vendors to get trained up and offer this, but they may be self-serving, even being charitable that they're good people. What about a model for a vendor neutral who goes beyond the auditing to recommending a strategy for investment and being the advocate to help people get the right for-profit vendor in to do the work? So instead of so much trial and error, you have young, talented, green-collar folks who learn to be these vendor neutral advocates and get through hundreds of homes and get good at it.
Great thought, Gary. Thank you for that question and that point. And I agree. I mean, part of the challenge that we face here at DOE is a lot of our funding is very statutorily restricted. It doesn't allow us to open up dollars to fund community-based organizations, as an example, as easily in order for us to provide that ground game. But I think you're spot on. And something in the Inflation Reduction Act that is very unique is that Congress allowed for these rebates to flow through an intermediary, through what they call an aggregator. And the aggregator was not defined in Congress. So when we did our RFI and tried to request information from the market, we had over 300 people reply, organizations applied to that RFI. And a lot of them tried to answer this question around aggregators, because you can imagine that potentially these whole home service providers could be aggregators. These green banks and CDFIs could potentially be an aggregator. Utilities can be seen as aggregators that will, and what I mean by that is being able to kind of facilitate the rebates within a given region through that intermediary, right? And of course, utilities have customer base that they can market through bill inserts and the like, and potentially even do on-bill financing, potentially braid additional capital. So the idea behind these rebates is if we only do one-for-one replacements here, we're going to do maybe 700,000 homes, right? Appliances and homes. We need to scale this. This needs to be a market opportunity to create new business models where the rebates are seen as a part of the capital stack, and we're then braiding and blending additional low-cost capital pools to deploy this at scale. That's why the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is super exciting, because you get the $27 billion that's about to flow across the country, and you have this really low interest capital pool to then braid on top of the rebates. And now a whole home service provider can take this to a whole nother level. So, I don't have a good answer to your question, but we are thinking about ways in which we can get to the community and we can identify these intermediaries that could potentially take some of the capital and sub-grant or re-grant and work with some of the unconventional partners to get the word out. Because we need like a street team, so to speak, is what I keep saying, to be on the ground and promote this, right? We need the neighborhood associations and the crime watch groups in our neighborhoods to even be part of this conversation. And so I think that's critical as we move it forward. Thanks for the question, Gary. I see Chuck has a question here about April's deadline in EECBG. So it's not necessarily a hard and fast deadline, but we are asking that all eligible entities provide a pre-approval form. It's on the website. I'm going to put it here. And it's essentially a very simple form to fill out that provides some preliminary information about your community and some high-level ideas about what you're looking to use the funds for. I'm going to put the EECBG link in the chat, and ultimately you can find a lot of information on the application hub, Formula Grant Application Hub, which I'll also link here. And that has all the information that you might need. And then the information collection form for eligible entities, I'm putting it in the chat, the last link here on EECBG. And that's specifically that form I just talked about that we're trying to get completed by the end of April. And it will give us some basic info about your community. One of the things about EECBG that I didn't bring up that I think is important is we are trying to make it easier for communities that essentially maybe just want to do some type of technical assistance. They might need support with analyzing the rooftop solar and storage potential of all of our public buildings. Let's just say that's something that's part of your roadmap that you wanted to do. Well, what we're doing at DOE is we're hiring an intermediary, actually, that will help to administer what we call vouchers, both equipment vouchers and technical assistance vouchers. And we're recommending this for communities that get about $250,000 in formula funds or less. Because at the end of the day, for some communities that don't have the administrative systems in place or the capacity to even bring down the $90,000 or $100,000 or whatever and report on those may be not enough juice worth the squeeze. And instead, we're trying to make it much easier to administer this type of fund by providing a voucher as an alternative. So instead of you procuring a firm to do an analysis of your rooftop solar, we're going to procure pre-vetted technical assistance services from our national labs and other partners that ultimately you'll be able to say, in lieu of my $100,000 grant or EECBG formula, I'd rather get $100,000 worth of technical assistance to do X, Y, and Z. And if that falls within the scope of the TA, then you won't even have to go through a formal application process for EECBG. You'll go through a voucher process. Evie, if this is something that you think South Bend is interested in learning more about, we should set up a time to connect, and I can connect you with my EECBG team. In fact, there's a whole webinar on vouchers that is coming up pretty soon, if it's not already on our website. But this might be an alternative to think about for South Bend. Again, it's for TA, but it's also for equipment. If you're thinking solar panels, I want EV charging stations, I want certain equipment that we're going to bulk purchase and provide pre-approved pricing for. And instead of you needing to go through your own procurement process to install 10 EV charging stations, you're going to be able to, in lieu of, use a voucher to get those 10 charging stations as an alternative. This is one way we're trying to make it easier for communities to get these resources. There are information in the ALRD and the application guidance document that was published in January. There's more that will be coming out here pretty soon. And that's part of why we want the form by the end of April, to understand which cities are thinking about voucher, which cities are not, and then that way we can divide up our staff to really help those streamline the vouchers and keep going. So hopefully that gets to your EECBG question.
Great, thanks, Chris. And we just had one more quick one from Gary and Councilmember Tomas Morgan. I'll wrap up with the city's next steps and responding to that. So just a quick question about, is there a funding source to help with tree equity?
Thank you for this question, Gary. I'm very passionate about urban forestry and tree canopy coverage. There is no funds in SCEP at DOE for these resources, but EPA, as well as Department of Interior, as well as even HUD in their CDBG grants, could be used for green infrastructure, which of course urban forestry is a part of. So I want to point you to a climate pollution reduction grant that the EPA has. It's significant. It's $4.5 or $6 billion. 250 million just got announced for the planning component of this. But then there's like 4.3 billion of implementation dollars to do climate mitigation stuff all across the board. It is a huge pot of money. I want to make sure Evie, you and the team are really looking at that, because it is something that I think you can be well positioned to bring down, and it could be broad-based in terms of your climate strategy.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you, Gary, for that question. It is 4:30 now, so we want to respect your time. And to wrap up, Councilmember Tomas Morgan asked about the city's next steps. Chris here today only covered even a portion of all of the opportunities available in those three components of the magic moment that he described. So we really are leaning on groups like the National League of Cities, Urban Sustainability Directors Network to help us comb through all of these federal funding opportunities and prioritize based on deadlines, urgency, how they overlap with our climate action plan goals to determine this is a go, no-go decision. We do partner with community-based organizations. I know a number of folks from InFocus are on the line and are also scanning a lot of these opportunities, which we are thrilled to partner with and work with community organizations here in South Bend to help our community take the most possible advantage of all these funding options at this moment. So we really do currently right now have our eye on completing that EECBG fund application form by April. We also got news of EV charging competitive funding last week, I think. We're in conversation with our Michiana Area Council of Governance about the climate pollution reduction grant and our strategy there. If the state doesn't apply for funds, that's when South Bend might have the opportunity to look into that. So we're waiting to see next week, I guess. That's their deadline to either apply or not. So as Chris mentioned too, there is a lot of, if the state doesn't move forward, then we have the opportunity. So some of the energy is hurry up and wait, but we are keeping our finger on the pulse and also communicating with our other municipal counterparts across the state to make sure that we're all communicating and also thinking about how we approach the state about a number of these opportunities. So thank you, Chris, for putting that link in the chat too for Energy Communities Funding Clearinghouse. And we're happy to have follow-up conversations with anybody on this call, both internal city staff, external folks, to talk about what our strategy should be moving forward. I just want to thank Chris again for all your time. My pleasure, Evie. And I'm going to leave you all with one last thing. In Orlando, right before I left, I held a federal funding workshop because I knew that these were coming down and IRA hadn't even been passed. But what I did was bring together 19 different public and academic sector partners, right? City, county, university, transit, utility, right? State DOT, state EPA, and all got together into a room for a full day. The idea was to focus on climate inequity. Each entity presented a slide with the top 5 priorities that they had for climate inequity as it relates to transit and utility, And we ended up identifying so many overlaps of projects that we had no idea that we could jointly apply for, that now there are working groups set up in energy efficiency, clean transportation, renewables, even green infrastructure that are all trying to look for the grants, right? And so you have teams that have broken out and are taking ownership of certain components of these resources and then coming together in that larger group on a monthly basis and just making sure that we have a learning community. Part of it is establishing those collaborations, those partnerships, not just for this shock, but into the future. This is how we make this transition. I know you guys are doing that in South Bend. I think it's important that we continue double tapping on the importance of these types of partnerships. That's the only way our communities are going to be competitive with these dollars. And so just want to encourage you all to do that. And yeah, I look forward to seeing the great progress in South Bend. Thank you. Great. Thank you again. And thanks everybody for attending. Okay. Bye-bye.